Greetings and welcome to another round of Master Phil in Your Corner. This is episode number 126, and we're going to get into concealed carry, gun laws, and all that kind of stuff. And, there's one person that is my go-to, my legal eagle, especially when it comes to guns and law. We have with us a repeat offender on the show. We have Paul Wiegartner, and he is not only an attorney, but a former FBI agent. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Phil. Nice to be here. So just a little bit about my background. I was an FBI agent for almost 25 years. While I was there, I was also a legal advisor, and I would teach both defensive tactics and use of force, and legal search and seizure, all that to FBI agents. So I have a little bit of an understanding of what the rules are. I think one of the reason that you wanted to do this podcast today, and one reason it's so interesting, is it is a very rapidly evolving area of the law right now. So I actually had to do a little research and refresh myself on what's going on. So I've done that and ready to jump in. So
That's awesome. The things that you bring up an interesting point, and something, I am a legal concealed carry permit gun owner. I can carry right now in somewhere over 40 different states legally, but the laws are different from state to state. And you think it would be universal, like a driver's license. It's kind of funny, driving is a privilege and gun ownership is a right, but it's a whole nother story. But the things that these laws seem to change quite a bit, and they seem to change more often in the left-leaning or bluer states. I think they're trying to throw us off, trying to catch us off guard and throw us in jail. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, it certainly seems that way. And I think, 2000s, late 2000s and all that, there seems to have been more and more of a push for gun control. We had school shootings and other situations. And like you say, in predominantly some of the bluer states, they created a model where they tried to go to almost a total ban of firearms. They're gun-free zones, which is interesting because the criminal is going to abide by the sign. Don't bring it.
Oh yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like chopping the antlers off the antelope so the lion won't eat them.
Yeah. So they have there's a lot of that, and it is massively evolving. The Supreme Court stepped in a number of times.
Yes,
and I think it might be useful just to go through like a little bit of the history of how we got here.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because at one point, like, everyone had guns, right? It's at one.
Sure. I mean, this nation was founded on the Second Amendment, the very right behind free speech, and freedom of religion. They put the right to carry guns. But that's been under attack for years, and it's not until recently where the Supreme Court even said that applies to individuals. It was the only Bill of Rights that they said didn't apply to a person, which made no sense. But sure, back in you think of this Western culture, but certainly everybody had a right to have guns, and that's one of the things the Supreme Court when they did it was I think I have the date on this here. Well, let's start with what the Second Amendment actually says.
Yeah.
So the Second Amendment, and this is where a lot of the blue-leaning states leaned on the first part. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So they really jumped on the militia. That means only like the National Guard and well-regulated militia can have guns, an organized militia type thing. And it wasn't until 2008 that this was actually clarified by the Supreme Court. And this is a case got a lot of press at the time. It was a DC case, so it was a federal case, the District of Columbia, that essentially had almost an outright ban on firearms. So there was a police officer who had a right to carry, whose name was Heller, had a right to carry a gun on duty, but he wanted to carry it at home. And they denied him a license to carry a gun at home in the District of Columbia. So it seemed like a pretty ridiculous.
It's such a safe area, DC. There's no.
Yeah, exactly. So he doesn't need it at home. Like nobody's going to follow him home for one of his cases or try to break in. So in the Heller case, and it was blasted in MSNBC, CNN. So it essentially said no, that it is an individual right. It was the first time ever, and it's only 15 years ago here that the Supreme Court said an individual has a right to carry a firearm, and they threw out the DC law. But what happened from that wasn't the end of it. So and I don't want to get too much in the weeds on constitutional law, but the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, were intended to apply to the federal government. They're federal. It's to restrict the feds. And there's been an ongoing debate on, well, what rights apply to a state then? Which one of these Bill of Rights can we force on a state? And the Supreme Court has taken kind of a piecemeal approach on putting these all in. They through the 14th Amendment due process, they have selectively said, okay, we're going to apply the Fourth Amendment, we're going to apply the First Amendment. But it wasn't until 2010, a couple years after the Heller case, where they ruled that it applied to the states. So the Second Amendment does apply to the states. It was a Chicago case, very similar case, guns essentially outlawed in Chicago. Some people tried to get guns, weren't allowed to get them.
Wait, for some people who may not know this, guns outlawed.
Yeah, basically.
In Chirac. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, exactly. Chicago has the
it's got the most horrendous murder rate per capita.
It's as bad as third world countries. Chicago, Los Angeles, the ones with the most strict gun laws.
Yeah,
is it a chicken and an egg thing? They pass these strict gun laws in response to the violence, but it doesn't stop anyone from having a gun. So.
Because funny, if you take out all these blue cities, out of the gun, out of the statistics, our death per gun for guns is exceedingly low for the rest of the country.
Yes, but you have New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Compton, so Oakland, California, so Baltimore. So there's one thing in common. The Chicago mayor recently, and I know they've had a couple different ones, but I remember I laughed because they had blamed some of the gun crime on Republicans.
Of course.
And they haven't had a Republican mayor in 60 years.
60 years.
It's like 60 years. And it's their fault. They'll claim it's because surrounding states have these lax gun laws, and those are the ones that are bringing them in. But so there is, some ostensible logic to them, but it is kind of comical.
Yeah.
So then what happens? All right, now that the Second Amendment does, after 2010, after the Chicago law, they do apply it to the states. But then these states, they're testing the limits of that. So New York, which is near and dear to us because we live in that area, and I worked in New York for 20 years, and carried a gun in New York for more than that. New York passed laws, and I'm a member of the bar of New York. So New York.
I've been in bars in New York.
Yes, exactly.
Been in bars in New York. Just saying.
That's an issue with the gun. We'll talk about that. So New York had very restrictive gun law that essentially you had to have a really good reason to have a gun. And
the Sullivan law, right? Was that the Sullivan?
Demonstrated need that went beyond proper cause, went beyond self-protection.
Okay. Can we just follow it back? I'll tell you, being a former bouncer, worked in New York, worked in Hell's Kitchen, worked in the underground, I can tell you right now that I would pat guys down and they had guns on them. And I would just, hey, listen, I don't care. I'd say, here, give me your gun, put a rubber band with their license on it, keep it in a drawer. You can't use it in here, but I know when you go out in the street, you need it. But in here, I got it. Yeah. And I never had an issue with that, with any of them.
That's good. I mean, there have been a lot of shootings in nightclubs and bars.
I know. I didn't want them. The 80s too.
But so New York law got challenged, and that was found to be unconstitutional. And that was pretty recently,
That was very recent.
2012, the Bruin case. It's 2022, so
Yeah.
that's very very recently. But New York, never to fail. They're not going to give up. They still make it very difficult. Where they did away with that demonstrated need, they still have you have to have a person of good moral character, which I don't know. You look at these judges these days. Could if you wore a MAGA hat, would they tell you don't have good moral character because you support a Nazi or something? Like who knows? But they're very nebulous terms.
Yes.
That allow you to they're pushing back as much as they can against this evolving law. But what they do have, what is the law now, is this: you can carry a firearm. You have to have a license. You can apply. You have to be a person of good moral character, and you don't have that same demonstrated need, but they still make it difficult.
Oh, yeah.
But if you do happen to get one, there are a certain number of restricted places where you can't carry it, and they essentially have these exceptions where you can't carry that swallow the rule. So some of the exceptions are Times Square, and public transportation like the subway.
Yeah.
Where
you need it most. Where you need it most.
Anywhere where they serve alcohol. So if you go into a restaurant and they serve alcohol, you can't have a gun in there.
Isn't that most states though? I believe Florida's like that too, isn't it?
Florida's a little different. They do have some restrictions, but it's not as extreme. So
oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
And the public transportation isn't the same in Florida. Certainly you don't have millions of people on the subway.
Right.
Where all the crime is, a lot of the crime is being committed.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that Daniel Penny case in a little bit.
Yeah.
But they still have New York's and then some of them were recently challenged, and the Second Circuit, which is the appeals court that covers the federal appeals courts in New York, they upheld New York's law. And the Supreme Court did not grant cert. They failed to review it. So that law stands right now, unless there's something that changes where they decide to review it later. But that's unusual. They had an opportunity to look at it, and they declined it very recently, I think in November of last year. So right now they have all those restricted places in New York where you can't carry a gun.
Well, there's another thing.
If you have a license.
Yeah.
They did. Interestingly, which they didn't do prior, and I think it's just because they realize they're going to get challenged on these laws. There is a federal statute that I happen to have a permit under that is colloquially called HR 218,
yes.
And it's retired law enforcement officers. And it's a federal law that says you can carry in all 50 states, provided that you qualify under the standards of your own state that you're a resident of.
Yeah.
So I just recently had the Lee County Sheriff's Office hosted retired FBI agents at their range in Florida here where I am, and they put us through their course. And we have to do that. We have to qualify just as many times as their law enforcement does to keep that.
Yeah, and also just so you know, I'm sure that you know this, but many people don't. So you can have 15 round, 20 round magazine in Florida, but if you come to Jersey, you have to have a different capacity. You can only have 10.
Yes, they do. There are high capacity magazine restrictions in New York, New Jersey.
Yep.
New York used to have a 7 round.
Yeah, 7 round. Yeah.
And I actually retired. I retired from the FBI in 2014, so I've been gone for a while. And New York's law was still in the books at that point with the 7 rounds. So I ended up buying a 45. That has 6 in the 6 round magazine and 1 in the chamber, because my thought was if I only have 7 rounds, I want 7 really big ones.
Yeah.
So I have a Glock 45 there, but that law was eventually overturned as being too restrictive.
Yeah.
But they did say that 10 round restriction is okay. And a lot of law enforcement has a double stacked 15. And if you had that gun as a carry and you retired, it might be a problem. Like I say, now some of the new New York laws, they are including the HR 218 in being covered as not under some of the restrictions of sensitive places and all that.
There's something. What sparked this this podcast was a few months prior. I know we talked about it. New York, when I had got my Jersey permit, I'm like, let me go get the New York one. I was not permitted to get a New York license. I could not carry.
You're not a resident of New York, so
Yeah.
yeah.
So recently they changed it though, where you can, but you have to take, it's like a 3-day course. It's like 18 hours of
Yeah.
training. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 2 days.
Like this is probably an area, and I talked about this when we were going to do this podcast. I probably disagree with you a little on this. I think some of those training things are good.
No, I think they're good
I've
too.
been around,
Oh,
and there are people who from Pennsylvania. They grew up hunting all the time. Even that in a rural area. Like my experience is, even law enforcement officers. And I trained with a lot of police officers and FBI agents who I would not want to be backing me up with a gun, and they have a lot of training.
no, I don't disagree with you. I
Yeah.
don't disagree with you. Look, I've actually trained police officers to be able to pass their test, their shooting test.
Okay. So you see, so it is, and when if you're in a situation where you feel compelled to use deadly force, it is likely a situation that there's a lot of adrenaline going. There's pushing, shoving, screaming, or shooting going on. It's a bad. You're going to be hyped up, and when every research has shown that your motor skills deteriorate in a situation like that, and your judgment deteriorates. You get tunnel vision. You get all this going on.
Yep.
So having training requirements,
I
understand they're doing it as a way to try to keep people from getting them, but I think it's a good idea. So,
oh no, listen, I'm all for that. But my issue with New York is the fact that when I was in that first wave of people to get their permits here in New Jersey,
yeah,
and I had to take the which HN2 test. I took one of the FBI tests.
okay,
Honestly, I mean, kind of stupid though for me shooting with a pistol from 25 yards away, especially in the state of New Jersey. I mean, I'd be tried for capital murder if I shot someone.
Yeah, exactly. You would. So
So they've changed the test since then. Now it's 15 yards.
Yeah, the new test we just did for Florida is completely different. They don't do a revolver anymore, which I was disappointed in because, I do have a Florida concealed carry too, which, like you said, has got reciprocity in numerous states, so I can carry a revolver with that. But because that doesn't have the qualification requirement. But the HR 218 course, the new law enforcement course, Florida, very different. It's all close in.
Yep.
It seemed pretty good for me. I thought it was a little more realistic. So
right. Especially look, and the other thing is I said, about this requirement for the 25 yards. Look, what if you're a small woman who needs a gun, right? How is she going to hit a target that far away with a firearm? First of all, it's hard for anyone to, and you're not going to use it that far away. It's going to be up close and personal. It's 10 feet or less.
Absolutely.
But my issue with them is that, look, I went through all this test. I went through the training. I've had guns for, I don't know, 35, 40 years. I don't even know how long, since the 80s. Okay. And I mean, obviously I'm a certified NRA shooter and this blah, 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 blah. I've taken these hard tests. Well, they know that if I have a Jersey permit, I took that test. Why do I have to go through theirs when that's my issue? They just don't want people to carry, and it's very.
No, they don't. And then obviously they make it restrictive as much. They push back against the court system as much as they can. They're going to say, okay, if you let it, you say we can't have this demonstrated need, but we're going to do good moral character and must do training and who decides if you pass the training and all of that. So these states and it does seem to be certainly more of the blue states that do it. Yeah. Now other states like Florida, has what they call the constitutional carry.
That's new. That's relatively new.
It's new, and it's some of that's in response to the recent court cases that say that an individual has a right to have a gun. So per the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment applies to the state. So they're saying, all right, that you don't need a permit then. There's a lot of problems with that. And some of the problems are that there's all sorts of exceptions built into the constitutional carry. And I look at it like I used to teach automobile searches. When you pull someone over and you think there's probable cause to think they have drugs or contraband or evidence or something in there, when you need a warrant. And we used to use shorthand for it because the court cases would say that, well, a car is more mobile than a house. You don't have time to get a warrant a lot of times. So the standard was almost if you could get a warrant, you don't need one. was what I used to do. Like if you have enough probable cause where you could go to a judge and get one, then you don't need it. But when you don't have it, it's kind of switched the burdens that you have to prove why you had this articulable suspicion that rose to low. It's almost the same with the constitutional carry. I draw the analogy because there's all sorts of exceptions to the constitutional carry of if you could get the permit, you don't need it. You could get that concealed carry permit in Florida, then you don't need it if you were qualified and all. But there's a lot of things that don't qualify you, and there are things like you've heard of the Baker Act, which is someone who is deemed a threat to themselves or others and can get involuntarily committed for a certain period of time. There's something similar in Florida, and I'm sure other states that it's similar with narcotics, that you can be involuntarily committed if you have your threat to yourself or others because of this addiction that you have. And the question becomes if you have alcohol-related problem, drug problems, or mental illness problems, then you're not entitled to get a concealed carry permit. Hence, you're not entitled to constitutional carry. Where do they draw the line out there? Like, if you are you going to AA? If you haven't had a drink in 20 years, but you're a demonstrated alcoholic, I don't know how that would go. And I got constitutional carry. Well, you're an alcoholic. You wouldn't have passed there's things like that I think can be very problematic to people. They also have, if you've ever been subject to domestic violence restraining orders, and I think there's some time limits on that. Again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I know enough about it. If you have, when I was a prosecutor in Elizabeth, New Jersey, in Union County, and I had a gun case that I prosecuted. That was very morally challenging for me because I thought it was a ridiculous case that shouldn't have been prosecuted, but it was my job to do it, and I was being told to prosecute it.
Yeah.
The person did end up eventually getting probation, which is really, really rare. I don't know how that happened, but the judge kind of agreed with the defense attorney on all the reasons why. But there was a situation where the lawful gun owner that had purchased all his guns legally, some out of state, but then he had also purchased legally a number of modifiers, like a collapsible stock on a certain weapon and all. And a number of the guns that he owned ended up being per se illegal in New Jersey. They were considered illegal assault weapons and those type of things, or it had a collapsible stock was something that was prohibited. And had a situation with a custody battle with the mother-in-law, accused him of pushing her. And whether or not that really happened, I still dubious about. But so they go and they get these domestic violence orders. They're all done ex parte. You're not there to present your side of it.
Yeah.
And they'll run into a court and say, this person assaulted me, did this, and they can get the state, the police are the ones who actually go and do it, but they'll say, hey, we're going to get this domestic violence restraining order against this person. And essentially acts as a search warrant. So they come to your house and they say, hey, you're subject to this restraining order that we just got ex parte. We have a visitor. And we need to search your house right now to see if you have any guns.
Yeah.
And that's what happened in this case. And you're not allowed to say no. It has the same effect as a search warrant. So it's all done ex parte, which a search warrant would be too, but it's really not the same level of scrutiny that you get. Then they come into your house, they search it for guns. In this particular case, the guy had a safe, all legally locked up, opened them up, had gun collector, had 20 guns. And I said, oh, these 8 are not legal, and you're charged with 8 separate felonies, and you're looking at 30 years in jail. And that's happened in that case. And fortunately, the prosecutor somehow dropped the ball on that case, and the person ended up getting probation, but did get convicted of a felony. And in a lot of cases, people like that, you're going to go, you don't realize that you lose that right to have a gun. Now in a state like Florida with the constitutional carry, if you've been subject to any of those, you might not have the right to have the constitutional carry. If you're an AA, there are a lot of different things where So my advice that I always gave when I was teaching FBI agents about search warrants is if you can get one, get one. Call a judge. You can sit there on the side of the road, make the guy wait. If they, so it's just much safer to do that way.
Yeah.
And people didn't want to do it, but that was always our advice when we're teaching is just go the extra mile. It's not that it's still pretty easy to get a concealed carry in Florida, and like you said, it has reciprocity in 30 some odd states.
Yeah. I think
Why
38.
not get it?
Yeah.
You go and you fill out an application, they fingerprint you. That's another thing. If you've been convicted of a domestic violence, misdemeanors, any felony, even if it's a white collar crime. I had another client when I was doing defense work that and had it seems like there's a lot of scorned women involved in some of these, but had an ex-girlfriend claim that he had a gun and she'd seen him with a gun and all of this. And he had a 20-year-old white collar crime conviction for some kind of securities fraud. So the FBI slammed, 6 o'clock in the morning, raided his house, handcuffed everybody while they searched. Didn't find a gun, but then there's news articles about it. This person is in. They have to hire a lawyer, spend money, do all this, and it can be very difficult. So it's a very challenging area, and it gets even more complex if you actually use your gun. So now we're talking. We get in the area of use of deadly force, and when it's appropriate.
Yeah,
and the laws differ significantly from state to state.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially like state of New Jersey, we got Florida stand your ground. New Jersey is run like a clown.
Yeah, a duty to retreat. Exactly. New Jersey, and New York have this duty to retreat where you're allowed to use deadly physical force if you have an imminent belief that you're about to be subject to it, and to prevent the use of deadly physical force against yourself or someone else. However, like you say, in certain states, tend to be the blue ones, there's a duty to retreat if it's safe to do so.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me of the old Robin Hood in the Monty Python series. Brave Sir Robin, he bravely turned his back and fled. So when names are here to ugly head. So like, people don't realize that, and if you're in a situation where there's some force being used and you're trying to intervene on a situation, well, what duty do you have to retreat if you're one of those? Yeah. It's a very look at. I wanted to bring up the Daniel Penny case, which didn't involve a firearm, but the same legal can apply.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Like, what if you see abuse or rape or something going on, and you have a legal carry permit and you're armed?
Yeah, well, you can prevent the use of, you can use it to prevent something like that.
Okay, so let's talk about
theoretically.
Use it to prevent. Is using it to prevent shooting the person, telling them you have a gun pointing at them, hitting them in the head with it, like in Goodfellas. What?
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult thing, because if you look at the carotid artery restraint, which they all call it chokehold. We taught that. I don't know if they still do. Like I said, I've been gone a long time, but we taught that all the time in the FBI. It's a rear naked choke, essentially. It's very effective if it's done properly. It doesn't hurt the person. It restricts the blood flow to their brain, which they'll pass out in 3 to 5 seconds, and then you can constrain them, handcuff them or whatever.
One of the problems with that, though, is that when people are high on narcotics, they die when you choke.
Yeah.
That's been the problem. That's why they outlawed it. Like, you even have to, because I teach use of force, and you can use a seatbelt grip, right? Where you go across the shoulder and under the arm. But if that arm slips up, you can't use it anymore. Now it becomes a choke.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fine line. And you know what? And the thing is that people have to practice, whether you are a cop and you have to put your hands on someone, or you are a cop and shooting, or you're a private citizen and you're armed. You have to practice, and you have to practice like your life depends on it, because it does. And how many people are really practicing at that level?
Yeah, and you look at yourself, Phil. You were a wrestler, I don't know, a 47th degree black belt, you bodybell method, you're like, it's very different for you to get into some sort of a physical confrontation or something where force has to be used, and maybe different for me, although I'm getting older and slower, than it is, the 120-pound woman.
Right, right.
Like what is, if you have a 200-pound man fighting with, good luck to that guy, because he's going to be in trouble if he messes with Phil. But if 120 pounds, I don't care how tough she is. So
right, right.
We used to have the wrestling club that I taught at in Elmwood Park, New Jersey for a while. We had a woman that went there who was the #1 ranked MMA woman in the world. And she would wrestle with a lot of the 16, 17-year-old boys that were her weight and all. And they held their own with her and mostly would beat her. Now, if you took someone who was on that caliber, same weight class even, as a male, they would destroy those kids. It wouldn't even be, I was a walk-on wrestler in college, and, already in my 40s at the time, and I could kill those kids. I was never anywhere near ranked #1 in the world, so you see the difference, and it's not just a size difference. It's a strength difference. It's a level, and it's something to be taken into account when you're evaluating these situations on someone when it's proper to use deadly force. And a court might look at it that way too. They might say Master Phil was out of line for using deadly force because he could have had all these other methods that he knows that he could have restrained this person. But for a 110-pound 80-year-old woman, they might say she's okay with shooting. So it's very complicated and evolving. So
yeah, it really is. And the thing is, once you pull that weapon, you're using it.
Yeah,
either you're shooting or you're using it to stop, threaten. But it's already you have played your cards. You showed your cards.
Well, that's the #1 thing that when we were teaching defensive tactics and all of that, and when I was taught it, was you never point your gun at anything that you're not willing to shoot at and destroy.
Well, the 4 rules, right? Right. Assume every weapon is loaded.
Exactly.
Never point a gun at anything that you're not willing to destroy.
Exactly.
Keep your finger off the trigger until your target is in sight, and know your target and beyond.
Exactly. So that's basic, but like I said, when adrenaline's flowing and all that, it can be a whole different thing. So
yeah. That's why you do have to practice. You also have to practice drawing your weapon. So
yes, and that was a good thing. Like I said, with the new course they had down in Florida here, there was a lot of drawing from the holster and all that.
Good.
But you see that we had a lot of the Agent Association here. I'm 61, and I look good, I know, but
I must tell you,
we had a lot of the
active man
agents were much older than that. And now they no longer do the revolver course. And I was in 1990, I was the next to last class to be issued a revolver with my training. So anyone older than that, certainly that's what they had. They may have retired when they were still using a revolver, and that's what they had as their carry all these years. And now they're being no longer allowed to do that. They have to transition to a semi-automatic weapon. And I saw some guys, they're late 70s, 80s, and it looked like they struggled a little bit to me, some of them. So
the things. I mean, if you talk about the difference between the 2 weapons, and for self-defense, you have larger magazine capacity with the auto loader. But hey, the wheel gun. Say if someone's laying on top of you, and you have to put it into them, the auto loader is going to jam. My revolver won't.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I own a revolver down here, and that's what my preferred carry.
Me too. I carry 357.
You drop it in the mud, it's going to work.
Yeah.
It might probably fire underwater.
Yep.
It just they don't jam.
Nope.
If you have a semi-automatic, it's not cleaned properly, and it's gonna jam it. Or also, you don't have proper wrist control.
Right. Because that was one of the problems.
The gun it recycles the recoil, forces the slide back and chambers another round. But if you're not holding it properly, it won't do that. It'll jam on you. So,
Yep.
and if you're in a situation you're fighting with somebody, you're doing all this, you're trying to shoot, maybe your wrist isn't straight when you fire that thing.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm very disappointed that it's a Florida Department of Law Enforcement thing. I don't know in New Jersey if you can still get for HR 218 if you can still get the retired law enforcement carry if you could still qualify with a revolver, but can no longer do that in Florida. So you have to do whatever the highest law enforcement department in your state is, and Florida no longer does revolver. So
Yeah, I don't know if that's such a great idea.
no, I don't like it. I don't like it, but I like their course, but I don't like that. So
Well, yeah, they changed the law here in Jersey, so you don't need to qualify with the weapons you carry.
okay,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah. When I first took it, it's funny. They give you two opportunities to pass. So I took two different guns with me. So, they give one
Yeah,
test one, which I blew the test away. Haha. So then I took another one of my handguns with me so I could, have two of them that I was qualified with. But then shortly thereafter, they changed, I think within that year, they changed it so I'd be able to carry, the revolver as well. So, but
yeah,
I'll tell you honestly, I like the revolver better. It's lower profile. You
yeah.
can't tell I have it on me. And
Agree totally. So,
yeah, and
but
it's
it's a
357.
dangerous situation. And then, now we have the current trend in gun laws, particularly blue states, but in Florida too. And Florida's laws were a reaction to one of the school shoot, the
Yeah,
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas
yeah,
school shooting situation is these red flag laws.
yes,
But they well intentioned and like a lot of
everything's well intentioned.
road to hell
Yeah,
paved with good intentions.
yeah,
It can be problematic because there is a lack of due process sometimes in these. And I
yes,
had a very interesting Florida. I was trying to educate myself on this in anticipation of talking to you. So I
yeah.
looked up some things and I saw a presentation by a law firm down here in South Florida where they were representing someone. It was like a situation where a student had made some kind of threats and there were some pending criminal charges. And student and a family were represented by a lawyer, and the police show up at the house and say, "Hey, we have this civil red flag order. We got to come into your house, and we're going to take away your guns." And the mom, is on the phone with the lawyers, and the lawyer's asking the police, "Can I see what it is you want my client to sign?" And like, listen, you don't have any rights here. This is a civil thing. This isn't the criminal thing. We're going in there, we're getting them. All she's signing is that she's going to show up in court for the day to talk about this restraining order preventing her from having guns. This goes on back and forth, back and forth. Police turn their body worn cameras off, and then they get the client, the mom, to sign the paper. And on the paper she signed, she was agreeing to a 1-year restraining order, not having guns. When it's clear, and I watched the body worn, the cops are on tape saying, "No, you're just agreeing to show up in court where you can contest this. This is only good for 2 weeks, this restraining order. You can come back in 2 weeks and fight it." And that's an extreme example, but there's you can't always trust the law. I was in law enforcement myself, 25 years, but almost, well, including my time as a prosecutor, so yeah, more than 25. But you see people. They're going to push the envelope, and they think, oh, here's a student who's made some threats that may have access to guns. We got to make damn sure they don't have it. And I understand the motivation behind it. I understand the motivation behind these laws.
Yeah.
And you see what happens when there is a situation. There's terrible school shootings, things like that.
Yeah.
And the history shows this person's been like, how could this person have access to a gun? There were so many red flags. So that's where these red flag laws came from. But there's a fair amount of lack of due process there, and that someone goes ex parte, you're not notified of it. They go and they say, so this happens a lot in domestic situations, people going through divorce and all.
Right.
That the people, again, it's going woman maybe, will say something to the effect of he's violent, or he did this, or he threatened me, and it's even happened with police officers. We had the FBI agents who had come under this situation where they're involved in in divorce proceedings or domestic issues, and there was allegations made against them, and you got to take their gun away. Now they can't work. That would happen with police as well. And maybe justified, maybe not, but like I said, there's a fair amount of a lack of at least initially, because it's all deemed like an emergency situation. You run to court and they don't tell you about it, and they get this order. Now you got to go fight this order. So
let's say you're John Q. Public, and you want to exercise your rights to bear a firearm and have a concealed carry. What do you think are some of the things, obviously, other than going through the courses in your particular state, so forth, but what are some of the things that they should look out for? I mean, should they, get like a U.S. Law Shield protection? Should they get some type of other?
There are a number of things like that. There's a concealed carry association, I believe, as well. I think those things are good because they will they not only have education programs, which I think are great.
Yes.
And that's an NRA and has education programs as well. And I think it's important to educate yourself as much as possible, because if you're choosing to carry a firearm, you're choosing to have something that can take someone else's life away and also put your life in jeopardy.
Yes.
So you ought to spend at least as much time as that as you do on choosing your bank account or where you do. It's an important thing. You really should pay some attention to it.
Yeah.
And people that grow up around guns maybe don't necessarily do that because it's just a natural thing for them.
Right.
But they really should I recommend doing that and taking the time. And those associations that you talk about too, a lot of them will carry an insurance with it, where at least they'll get you a lawyer and they'll help indemnify you if you get, because even if you're in a perfectly good shoot situation and you save someone's life, and you permanently injure or kill someone in the process, their family's going to sue you.
Oh yeah,
You're going to get there, even if it seems like it was perfectly justified. There's a lot of arguments why it isn't, and God forbid you have two drinks in you at the time, then you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
If you're carrying a gun, that you shouldn't be in a bar, you shouldn't, certainly shouldn't be drinking.
Yep. Yeah, you're going to lose. And the other thing is, if you do shoot someone and it is a clean, legit shoot, get on your knees, put the gun away from you.
Yeah.
Interlock your hands, put them behind your head, and wait for
that's the thing too. Yeah, because the police don't know who you are when they're showing up.
They don't know. So just be like this and save your life, because you may wind up with a bullet in you. Especially if you have a weapon in your hand.
Yeah, they see a weapon. This is a tragic story you just reminded me of. But the FBI hires a lot of veterans, which is generally a good thing. Yeah. But in the wake of like Desert Storm and all in the late 90s and all after that, you're having a lot of combat veterans, many of whom were trained very differently as far as what's a threat and what's not. And we had a tragic incident on a case I actually worked where we had some guys from Bed-Stuyvesant who were driving into New Jersey, and they were taking over banks, automatic weapons, and doing like a whole big takeover, get the vault kind of stuff. Yeah. Although we had very good description, we knew who they were essentially, and they were large African-American men from Bed-Stuy with dreadlocks and all that. Like there's a 50-year-old white guy gets out of a car in front of the bank with a pistol in his hand, and we had an agent shoot and kill him, and the guy was an agent. So we had a new agent that didn't know the other agent, that because we had mixed New York, New Jersey teams and stuff like that. And it was tragic. First reports came in from it. It's a shooting and they didn't know what it is. But like you said, man with a gun, boom, and especially someone that's trained differently.
Right.
So it can be a real issue. So
No.
That's very good advice. Not something I would have. Very good. So
you got to be careful.
Yeah.
So hey, listen. You know what? Having great power,
great responsibility.
Great responsibility, and you have to. You really have to understand what you have in your hand and what you're carrying on your body.
Absolutely.
Any last words for the audience?
No. Basically, the takeaway from this is it's emerging and complicated. Yeah. And if you're going to choose to defend yourself in that manner, which there's certainly reasons to do that, and depending on where you live as well, the crime rates and everything else. the violence that is unfortunate in this country. Make sure you educate yourself.
Yes, yeah.
Do as much training as possible. Research the laws. You know, there's those associations that you mentioned. The NRA is a great resource. Make sure you know what you're doing and talking about, because, and if you live in one of these states, constitutional carry or all that, whatever, you know, if there's a license available, get it, because it's going to give you an added layer of protection. It's going to give you reciprocity somewhere else. And some of these, you know, it may be annoying. You got to take a class or whatever, but do it. So
yeah, because you don't want to get caught in the crossfire. So.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, before we go, I want to give a couple of shameless plugs. The Barnes and Noble is doing a special on my new book coming out, Managing Back Pain for Dummies by Wiley Publications. So it's out actually now. They're taking pre-orders. I know it's April, but the books will be ready in October. And then, of course, we have the new book, Exercise Snacks. And don't forget to check out the Bodybell Method and philross.com. Thank you, Paul Wiegartner, for coming on again. Always a pleasure for your legal.
Thank you for having me.
And, we love having you as a guest. And see you soon. Thank you, audience. Strength and honor.
Strength and honor.